God's sakes, this isn't Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C. This is Decatur, Illinois.
On a cold and rainy March day 3 years ago, a Decatur businessman's life changed forever. Lured for a job.
I'm down on the ground, I'm frozen.
Pepper sprayed, kidnapped at gunpoint, held for ransom.
I said, honey, I've been abducted.
Transported to different locations in the trunk of a car, and a daring escape.
It's etched on my brain now, you know.
I sit down with Ed Good, who describes the day he nearly lost his life and life now as a traumatized victim. Good evening, I'm Dawn Sterling. Tonight, an exclusive story so bizarre, it's hard to believe, even for the police. But for Ed Good, the nightmare was all too real. For nearly 70 years, Good's Flooring has been running in Decatur. The building off Pershing Road is a little worse for wear, but inside, the latest trends in floor coverings. Now owned and operated by the third generation of Good, 49-year-old James Ed Good and his wife Nancy run the store now. He helps customers, goes to homes and measures and lays carpet. His wife Nancy runs the front office. The pair enjoy spending time with their dog and relaxing when there's time. It was a good life until one day it wasn't. March 24th, 2022 began like any other day for Ed Good. On that cool, rainy day, he had an appointment to measure for carpet. He showed up at 1231 East William Street to meet a client he had worked with before. Adamico Macklin Carney let him in.
After walking in the house, you see the rain coming through the ceiling. You know, young lady, you're looking at 3 to 4 months away from laying carpet here. That's okay, Eddie. Can we just get the measurements?
Ed threw his notepad down like any other job. But this wasn't like any other job he'd been on before.
I bend down to pick up my tape measure and write 12 by. That's when she runs over and hits me with the pepper spray.
Attacked by his client, a stunned Ed Good begins looking for answers.
I'm down on the ground, I'm frozen. My head turns to the left, and that's when I see a man standing in the door pointing a pistol at me. For God's sakes, this isn't Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C. This is Decatur, Illinois. The man walks over, puts the pistol against my head, tells me to stand up, put my hands together, zip ties me. He lays the gun down, he tears off a piece of tape, puts one piece of tape across my eyes. I said, that's not so bad. Then he wraps my head in tape from the top of my head all the way down to my chin.
Ed says he was then walked out the door and put into the trunk of a small car.
Boom. It was a Kia Optima.
Okay,
small car. Wasn't like I was in a Lincoln Town car. I could stretch out and take a nap.
Right.
But anyway, like I told you, I will always remember I weighed 203 pounds on March 24th, 2022, because my fat ass sunk the car down in the mud and we couldn't go.
Because you said it was raining.
We find out that they end up tearing down a piece of fence that next door and sliding it up underneath the car so we could get traction and get going. He ends up taking a really sharp turn and he pops the right fender or whatever it is off the front wheel, and we basically make our way through town.
He's taken to another house, which he believes is on Maple Drive, where he had worked for Macklin Carney before. He was taken down to the basement and zip-tied to a chair, but he never imagined what came next.
He said, we're going to call your wife. And she's like, hey, what's going on? I said, honey, I've been abducted. These people want $400,000 at the pavilion at Galloway Park by 2 o'clock, or they're going to kill me. What? Come on. What are you doing? Click. The guy asked me, he says, why doesn't your wife believe you? I said, sir, I've been with Nancy since 1994. I've never asked her for a dime, and today I'm asking her for 400 grand. Come on.
But the kidnappers weren't about to give up.
We call again, and something happened, because obviously we found out later, Nancy got hit with some lightning bolt from God or something, that she calls 911. So on the office manager's phone, she's talking to 911, and then she's talking to me as well.
With a pistol to his head, Ed Good is told to repeat after his kidnapper.
He said, honey, I said, first things first, do not call the police. I said, honey, I've been abducted. These people want $400,000. $400,000? I said, I know. We don't have $400,000. I said, I know we don't have $400,000. But I told her I was at 1231 East William. I don't know where I'm at now. I said, just in case, I love you.
She believed you then, huh?
Yeah, it's a heck of a way to confirm your love.
The next time Ed saw his captor, it was clear the pair knew police were on the case, and Ed's best chance of survival was to try and make a connection.
He comes back downstairs, presses the pistol against my head, and he said, "I thought I told you to tell her no, police." I said, "Now wait a second." I repeated every word you said. I said, "If Nancy called the police," I said, "that's on her merit, not on mine." I said, "Please don't do something stupid."
With nothing to lose, Ed tries to reason with his abductor.
I said, "People that kill people usually end up killing themselves." I said, "So if you don't kill me, two things are going to happen that day." He goes, "What's that?" I said, "Well, you're not going to kill anybody, and I'm not going to die. Just trying to build a bridge."
A bridge that seems like it might work.
He's like, "I don't know what to do." I said, "You don't have to do anything. If I let you go, are you going to call the police?" I said, "No, I just want to see my wife and see my dog."
Ed's captor left him once again in the basement, still bound and taped, totally helpless.
He comes back downstairs and he says, "I think I got a plan." And I said, "Okay." I said, "What's the plan?" I said, "Does the plan involve killing me?"
This story is far from over.
My eyes are all orange. I've got zip ties hanging from my left hand. My hands are all cut up and bloody with glass in them.
The plan, the escape, and the police officers who didn't even believe what they were hearing.
I mean, it's like something out of a movie.
But how will Ed's story end? Find out when we come back.
I said, "What's the plan?" I said, "Does the plan involve killing me?" And he says, "No, it doesn't." I said, "Whatever the plan is, I'm in."
Welcome back. We're hearing the story of Ed Good, who went to work one Thursday morning in March of 2022 and almost didn't make it home. What's going through your mind at this time?
I'm going to die.
We've heard Ed talk about being pepper sprayed, zip-tied, and thrown in a trunk. His kidnappers demanding $400,000 from his wife. Money he says they don't have. At this point, Ed is still in a basement with his whole head covered in duct tape and under a hood. But Ed has started to forge a connection with one of his captors, and that may have saved his life.
I said, "Is there any chance you'd take this tape off my head?" And he says, "I don't want you to see my face." I said, "I don't want to see your face." I said, "You tell me what to do, but if you're not going to kill me and you're going to get rid of me, I'm going to need it to be able to see so I can move, and I'm not going to the police." He presses the pistol against my head really hard. I said, "Please don't do this. This is for me and you, man." And he lays the gun down and he starts taking the tape off.
When the tape was off, the hood went back on, and Ed was once again taken outside and put back into the trunk of that Kia. When the car stopped again, he was taken out of the trunk and put into the back of this abandoned minivan that has a broken out back window.
So when he tells me to sit and he swings my legs up, my hands basically dive into this glass. "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm okay. Don't worry about it." Well, he slammed the door down and the rest of the glass comes down on top of me. And I said, "What happens next?" He said, "You stay here." I said, "Okay." He said, "Don't you go nowhere." I said, "I'll be here, sir."
Ed heard car doors slam and a car start and drive away. He lay there, bleeding and seemingly helpless, listening to the rain fall on the top of the minivan.
And I'm sitting here fidgeting, and then all of a sudden, my right hand comes out. I laid there for a few minutes, and I thought, man, if I'm going to do something, now's the time. And I took this hood off my head, and I looked at this broken window, and I thought, I can crawl out of here.
After hours in captivity, Ed was finally free. But the ordeal wasn't over yet. Ed looked around and ran to a nearby house for help.
Pretty good-sized fella opens the door. "Whoa, what happened to you?" "Buddy, I'm getting ready to go get something to eat, and then I'm going to work. I'm not going that way."
Turned away and still fearing his kidnappers were coming for him, Ed started trying businesses, pulling on the doors at Sentinel Pest Control and the Eagles Club. Finally, an exhausted, terrified Ed Good walked in the door at Peerless Cleaners. As fate would have it, one of the women working that shift knew him.
She's like, "Ed, is that you?" I said, "Yeah, what's going on?" And I keep looking out this big window thinking,
Any minute.
they got to be coming for me.
The woman called 911 and learned the police had been searching for Ed. Help was on the way. He was finally safe. But safety came with its own challenges. Ed's wife had already been skeptical of his story, hanging up on him the first time he called. Now he had to make police believe he had actually been kidnapped, held for ransom for hundreds of thousands of dollars in Decatur, Illinois.
And he's like, all right, Ed, so you owe these people for dope. You got gambling debts with them.
Ed's outrageous story takes him from victim to suspect.
And if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. Lying to the police is against the law.
So, I mean, initially, yes, there is some skepticism just because, one, the story seems pretty incredible. It's like something out of a movie.
Detectives trying to understand the unbelievable and looking for a more logical explanation.
So you and Nancy, are you guys having financial problems? You having marriage problems? Are you seeing somebody on the side?
At first, even Ed's escape doesn't make sense to the detectives. Why would his abductors just leave him in an abandoned van?
They had already done so much. I mean, they pepper sprayed him, held him at gunpoint, threw him in the trunk of a car, drove him to the other side of town, and then it was almost like at 1 minute, things just switched and it was like, okay, we'll just cut our losses here. And
soon the detectives will believe Ed, thanks in part to an emotional reunion with his wife. So you ended up kind of reuniting them. What was that like?
His reaction to seeing her was somebody who thought they were never going to see their wife again. It was very genuine.
They were prepared for the worst.
Right. Now the detectives' work really begins. Their search for the suspects and how they put it all together when we come back. Lured, pepper sprayed, and kidnapped for ransom at gunpoint. We continue the story of Ed Good, the Decatur businessman who lived to tell the story. His captors, a brother and sister duo looking for money.
It's all monetary. It's a crime of opportunity.
23 years old at the time of the crime, Adamiko Macklin Carney pinned as the mastermind behind the ill-conceived plan. Her brother, 20-year-old Assyrian Carney, the muscle.
I believe that she initially was the person that came up with this plan.
According to the FBI, adult kidnappings in the U.S. are not an everyday occurrence.
The volume domestically of those cases, it's on the books because it happens, but to sit there and give a specific number, it's a lower volume, yes, than, say, a lot of other crimes that happen.
Ed Good wasn't spinning a tale for attention.
As I did this investigation, it became obvious pretty quickly that he was telling the truth.
Even though it seemed a situation beyond belief, Ed is taken back to the Decatur Police Department to go over his 7-hour nightmare. Ed had laid carpet for Adamiko before, first at her apartment, then in this house on Maple Drive. According to the Department of Justice, when she booked the measurement for 1231 East William Street, she gave Ed a different name.
He kept telling me, I know her name, I remember her, I've dealt with her before. And then later on, that same night during our interview, it was almost like it just came to him and he said her first name.
Adamiko was arrested just 4 days later.
Adamiko Macklin Carney, we're prepared to charge you with aggravated kidnapping, held for ransom, secretly confine and secretly transport a human being.
Her arrest was almost solely based off of Ed's statement. I mean, there was just a lot of things that tied her into it.
Including that piece of car that Ed said was ripped off in this alley behind 1231 East William Street, the place he was lured to measure carpet.
He ends up taking a really sharp turn and he pops the right fender.
And we actually went back out to the house where the East William Street address and the piece of the bumper was there, and we're able to put it up there and 100% say that it came off that car.
This is 1231 East William Street. The house now gone. A new fence where the kidnappers had ripped off a piece to get the Kia out of the mud. The abandoned home torn down because in the early morning hours of March 25th, 2022, police say in an attempt to cover up the crime, the house was set on fire. The home next door still scorched.
I don't know what they thought. I don't know why they would obviously pick him specifically. The only logical answer to me is that they had this previous flooring thing done.
It took Decatur police a little over a month to arrest Adamiko's brother Assyrian, even though he was there in the car when Decatur police arrested her.
So I got the cell phone records, and then when we mapped all the records, they were together throughout the entire day.
Decatur Police Sergeant Jason Danner processed the evidence that day in March.
I mean, the most important parts were a can of OC, or like pepper spray in there, as well as a semi-automatic pistol, and then a couple strips of duct tape.
We're very quickly able to tie her to the house and the car that was used and identify her very quickly.
A now retired detective worked with the FBI and sent all the evidence to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia.
In this regard, we used some specialties, I believe, with chemistry and different things that worked out.
Ed's Mercedes dumped here on Green Street, where another abandoned home stood at the time.
His eyeglasses were in there. Those also had pepper spray on them. We took swabs of DNA from all the door handles. We fingerprinted everything.
All the money, were you surprised by that?
I was kind of surprised at the time that was there.
In the end, the siblings took nothing. Not Ed Good's money, Mercedes, jewelry, or even the Rolex on his wrist.
I mean, they pepper sprayed him, held him at gunpoint, threw him in the trunk of a car, drove him to the other side of town. And then it was almost like at 1 minute, things just switched.
And don't forget about where Ed was dumped, in that van that's still sitting on Packard Street all these years later.
We end up rolling over there. We get out, we walk over there. I said, there's the hood I was wearing. I said, and then my blood's probably on this glass right here.
We knew that he had come out of that van 100%.
It took nearly 3 years for Adamico and Asarian to go to trial, and it wasn't without controversy. This story has all the elements, including jailhouse threats against Ed Good and his wife Nancy, the presiding judge, the federal prosecutor, and his family too. After her arrest, the Department of Justice notes Adamico took steps to prevent the victims from testifying.
Where basically there was going to be hits on them, hits on me and Nancy. It's just like from jail.
Decatur police say after those threats, the judge recused herself and the trial was pushed back another 6 months. What has it been like for the long wait of trial?
I mean, it is a really eye-opener to how long it takes justice to take place.
In October of 2024, the two Decatur siblings were tried and convicted by the federal government for the 7-hour armed kidnapping for ransom of Ed Good.
The victim is made whole to some degree because of the convictions based on their work. And it's important to highlight the outstanding work. It doesn't matter how big or small a department is, they have really good employees, and Decatur did an outstanding job.
The sibling duo were finally sentenced on March 5th of 2025, which is why Ed can finally tell his story. U.S. District Judge Stephen McGlynn sentenced Adamico Macklin Carney to 30 years in federal prison. We reached out to speak to those federally involved in this case, but were referred back to the Department of Justice's news release after the sentencing. It says, in part, Judge McGlynn also noted that neither defendant expressed remorse for the crime. The judge gave her brother, Asarian Carney, 24 years in the federal penitentiary. Judge McGlynn noted although Macklin Carney was the mastermind of the operation and had a more serious criminal history, Carney was still the gunman and the muscle. Both are currently appealing their convictions. When Ed relived his terror for us, this is the closest he had been to the van in 3 years. He was visibly shaken.
That is James Edward Good's blood on that glass.
His memory, a blessing during the investigation, now feels like a curse.
It's etched on my brain now.
When we come back, how the Goods are coping with the trauma and worrying about what happens next.
I still think it's a win-win that I didn't die.
Decatur flooring store owner Ed Good was told in March of 2022 it was going to be a very bad day for him. And it was a terrifying 7-hour nightmare. A pistol to his head, zip-tied, duct tape on his face, a cloth bag put over his head.
I mean, you belong to somebody, you know.
A ransom demand of $400,000 or he would die. Judge McGlynn noted that the victim and his family would suffer long-lasting psychological trauma from the incident.
I mean, if he was just as hard as her, I might not be sitting here talking to you today.
Now, 3 years later, his tormentors may be locked away for decades. But for the Goods, the trauma isn't over.
8 days before the crime occurs. She's Googling Nancy and I, our marriage, where we live, the penalty for third-degree murder, an accidental killing.
While he made it out alive, most involved with the case don't believe that was Adamico's plan.
It would not have surprised me if they had killed him in the end.
Ed says the judge addressed this during the siblings' sentencing.
So I do believe that the minivan that your brother put Mr. Good in, I believe that's not where you house a hostage, it's where you dump a body. And I believe Mr. Good believes, by the grace of God, that he didn't die on March 24th, 2022.
After Ed's escape, the fear didn't end.
I figured we were in danger. Basically, when we got done with the police that night, obviously we didn't yield the money by 2 o'clock. They were prepared for the worst.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't forget, these people were still out there. Adamico for 4 days, Assyrian for about a month. And later, those jailhouse threats. Ed and his wife, Nancy, tell me they're always looking over their shoulder.
Exits, you're just thinking about, just in case something, God forbid, round 2,
The lingering trauma is still there. Ed is still in therapy. He still relives his trauma every Thursday, driving the route they took him, the day his life changed. The bag that was over Ed's head for all those hours was a Louis Vuitton dust bag. Although the dust bag and other items are still held as evidence, Ed felt the need to get one for himself.
I found out that I was wearing a Louis Vuitton hood. I said, I'm going to tell you a crazy story, then hopefully you'll give me one of these canvas bags.
I sat down with clinical psychologist Melissa Fisher-Paoni.
In terms of wanting to make sense of it, wanting to regulate after a significant trauma.
And we've taken it frame by frame, so you kind of like just take the movie and just make it in slow motion.
Even just like physiologically, the adrenaline of running for your life is part of like the post-traumatic stress disorder.
Fear turns into anger as Ed deals with his ordeal.
I hated their guts for the first couple of months.
Now, years later, as he and Nancy continue to replay the terrifying day, a new emotion has taken hold.
And it's just really, really heavy stuff.
Ed's surprising request when we come back.
He says, Ed, if all this is true, then you're lucky to be here.
Ed Good survived his kidnapping and managed to escape. His captors are behind bars, although they are both appealing their sentences. While detectives call Ed lucky, now Ed is looking toward a future that's paved with forgiveness. At first you wanted them gone forever.
Oh, yeah. I hated their guts for the first couple of months. I hated them so bad, wanted ill will. Wanted just, what happened to me should happen to them 10 times worse. I forgave them. It's tough. Whatever the plan was, it didn't work out. On March 5th of this year, I sat on the stand and read my little impact statement, and it says, you guys had a plan, and then God had a different plan. So I'm letting you know that I forgave you, and we're good. I said I would sit across the table from you so you could tell me why. I think I deserve to know that.
Do you think you'll get answers?
I don't think from her. I think maybe from him. I think I built a bridge with him.
Do you think your demeanor that whole time helped?
Assyrian told me multiple times that I talked too much. I said, I'm sorry, I'm gonna talk. I'd like to think that he truly didn't want to kill me. Almost like if they could get the money and not kill, then it would be okay.
Adamico and Assyrian didn't get their money. Ed survived, but the 7-hour nightmare changed a lot of lives that day. A husband and a wife that will spend a lifetime trying to recover, and a brother and sister who will likely spend decades behind bars. We reached out to their attorneys, who both couldn't go on camera because of the siblings' pending appeals. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch more videos from News Channel 20.